mission is to ensure a vital Earth for everyone. And with partners around the world, we go big on the solutions that will help communities and people thrive despite or in the context of those climate impacts. And so we're going to talk about food today.
We are going to talk about food.
Yeah, food and climate being inextricably linked. And I don't want to take...
No,
I want you to get a chance to ask some questions.
Yeah, I didn't do so well with Bill earlier.
This is going to work.
But so, I mean, we're talking about food insecurity, and your basic point that we talked about in the pre-call is that like the way we have fed it ourselves up until this point is simply not sustainable.
It's not.
It doesn't work for this size planet, and it's going to need to change.
It's going to need to change. So maybe put some facts on the table, which is that in the context of climate and food being so closely related, a third of climate pollution around the world is associated with food production. A third is associated with food production. So you can think about things like land conversion, waste, transportation, excess fertilizer use. All of these things matter when it comes to getting to a stable climate, and they all add up. And so that's an important fact when we think about how do we move forward. Another really important fact is that today we already produce 1.5 times the amount of food that the population of the world currently that we have needs. But we already have 1 billion people around the world who are malnourished, who are hungry, and we're seeing how extreme weather events are changing the patterns of farming and of fishing that produce the food that we all eat. And so those extreme weather events also are an important part of how we think about the solutions going forward.
One of the things we talked about too is looking at the global solution, and these effects are not being felt equally in different communities across the world. In a lot of ways, the people who are being most impacted are the people who are in the worst situation to deal with it.
Yeah, so we often talk about it as climate impacts first and worst for the most vulnerable people in the world. First and worst, the people who have not been responsible for the problems that we're in, and they're the ones who are dealing with it the most. So think of a coastal village in Kaimana, Indonesia. So a coastal village where they get their food from the ocean and their livelihoods from the ocean. And in that context, as the water's warm, it's really important to know this, as the water's warm, seafood is moving from the tropics and toward the poles. There's a mass migration of food happening in the oceans right now because the range is changing. So there is an existential question for these communities around the world that rely on seafood for their protein and where the waters are warming up. Marine species, I'm actually a marine biologist by training, though I do a lot of other things now, but marine species have really finely tuned thermal tolerances. They don't like hot weather. They don't like hot water. They're moving. So what happens to that community in Kaimana, Indonesia, that doesn't have a safe way down the road that they can go to access their food? This is a real challenge, and there are real solutions at hand to help make this better.
So let's get into some of those. What is the response? Like, how do we, we've got ratings for different seafoods, but like, what is the response? How are we supposed to feed ourselves in the future?
Yeah, so there's the seafood side of it, and then there's the agricultural side of it. On seafood, there are ready-made solutions, so they're accessible now. So, for example, there are with smartphones have revolutionized so many things, but for a lot of these very dispersed, very rural fishing communities around the world, they have smartphones. They have apps that allow them market data, scientific data that help them plan and better execute and harvest more smartly in a climate smart way. There are vessel cameras you can put on boats to track how many fish are being caught. And they're really practical solutions that reward those fisher folk when they conserve so that fish in the water today can reproduce and they can catch more next year. These are really practical really important approaches that can happen now. Another big challenge is around agriculture. So in that particular area, there's a huge opportunity with methane. So methane is responsible for much of the warming that we're experiencing today. And over half of the human-made methane emissions come from the agricultural sector. But again, there are sort of ready-made opportunities on the table. Oh, and I should say, this. Do you
I was
wanna
waiting
say
for it.
No,
No,
you
you
don't
can
want
do
to
it.
say it? Okay, so when I'm talking about methane and I'm talking about agriculture, I'm talking about cow burps, fun things, and rotting manure. Cow burps and rotting.
We're
come
doing a
on.
great job of taking it up a notch.
I was like, come on, guys. Like, there's no reaction to that. It's the best thing to talk about in the morning. And there are ready-made solutions for these challenges. For cow burps, a lot of it has to do with the feed quality that the cow eats. So if you improve the feed quality, you reduce the methane emissions and you improve the yield. So these are good things. There are technical solutions in various stages of development, like that are feed additives, like DSM's Bovaer, or there's a red seaweed called Asparagopsis and these are showing really promising early results to reduce the methane emissions from cow burps. On the manure side, everybody wants to talk about manure. In large farming operations, there are anaerobic digesters that can basically stop the emissions and then channel that methane, or natural gas, as it's also known, into an on-farm fuel source. And there are real issues around air quality and smell and other things at these big farming operations. I'm not trying to make light of that. But there are ready-made solutions for addressing the methane, and since methane is so potent and so now, it's really important we make progress.
What's the role, and this is where we run into controversy, is what's the role of the consumer in terms of, if we have to feed ourselves differently, do we have to eat differently? And do we have to make compromises that we don't want to make?
So my view, I would say EDF's view, is that people make their own choices about what they eat. And more importantly, changing what people eat is a cultural change. Cultural change takes place over a long period of time. You can't change the cultural context around what people eat overnight, even if you were to try. And we need to take action and make progress right now. Like, this is the time that matters. The next few years ahead, this is what matters. So we're really focused at EDF around getting those solutions that we can see benefits from right now in place as soon as we possibly can.
There's also tends to be like a gap. Most of the statistics you've cited today, I don't think most people know. Yep. Like there's a data shortage. We don't think about those consequences. Yep. I mean, I think adding a layer of transparency and just tracking more could have enormous benefits.
I totally agree with that. So one of the things I really think about is we have to rely on the food producers of the world to help us through the transition to a more climate resilient food system, food provisioning for all of us, right? They're the ones on the front lines, and they're experiencing climate change right now, right? This is already affecting their livelihoods and their businesses in a really important way. So the more tools that we can help provide to producers, the more likely we're going to see this transition happen. And data is a very important piece of that puzzle. It's important for an organization like EDF so that we can help lean in on the solutions that matter most, but it's even more important for them. So I would say there's a couple different really helpful examples of how how data systems and data tools can help drive better decision making and better outcomes. So one is a lot of agriculture is irrigated. We saw in your video that the water is running dry, and irrigated agriculture needs water, and groundwater supplies are diminishing, in particular in the places of the world where farming is most prevalent. This is a huge problem. So EDF, my organization, worked with NASA and Google and other partners to create a data platform system called OpenET. If you want to know what the ET stands for, it's not the movie, it's evapotranspiration, the process that has to do with how much water the plants are taking up and then exchanging with the air. And OpenET is a tool that farmers and water managers can use to basically finely tune their water application strategy. And that's helping. So we're working with ranchers in Colorado and other farmers here in the West to deploy that tool, and it's helping. They're making smarter choices. So that's one. Another one on agriculture is related to nitrogen. So nitrogen, fertilizer application, it gets into the waterways, it pollutes the water, and then becomes a very potent greenhouse gas, 300 times that of CO2. So it really matters from a climate perspective how much fertilizer is being used. Fertilizer is also super costly for the farmers, right? It's a big part of their cost structure. So how can we help them reduce their fertilizer and help improve climate and environmental outcomes? We've created this tool we call N-Balance. Basically, it puts in the hands of farmers and smartphone technologies or smartphone applications the ability to track and measure their own N-Balance. And when they stay in N-Balance, they can have confidence that they're increasing yields, reducing their fertilizer use, and improving their soil health, which for those, I know that there's at least one farmer in the room, soil health is so important to the future of their business.
We're going to go deep.
Yeah, I know. I don't want to blow that or say too much about that now, but N-Balance is a really important way for farmers to make meaningful progress in the world that they can control, right? So another one is around methane. So within the next year, EDF and partners will launch MethaneSat. MethaneSat will be the most advanced satellite tracking methane emissions from space. Now, MethaneSat's primary focus is on oil and gas, but as capacity allows, we would like to use MethaneSat to track large agricultural installations too, as well as the methane emissions that come from waste and landfills in particular. MethaneSat has a partner. This is. I'm going to take you down a little bit of a technology rabbit hole here. MethaneSat has a partner called Methane Air. Methane Air is a plane with the sensor that will fly on MethaneSat that we're testing, and we hope in the very near term to be able to deploy Methane Air and look for its sensitivity to picking up agricultural source methane emissions. This is a really important scientific advance that we hope will play out in the next couple years. So this is a watch this space kind of a area.
Yeah, the visuals are pretty fantastic. If you look at it from space, I had no idea that I suspected that there were methane leaks at oil and gas companies. They just don't track it. And this now, once they have the ability to see it, they can actually mitigate it.
Yeah, so one of the things that I've watched, I've been at EDF for a long time, and I and in the last years really only gotten involved in our methane work closely. And I've watched how even the idea of MethaneSat becoming a thing has helped get companies to the table and countries to the table to talk about how they can reduce their emissions even before it's launched. So we are launching it. It's not a figment of our imagination, but it's already helping to change the conversation and drive towards mitigation strategies immediately. And the sooner we can see action, the better we're all going to be.
Excellent. I think we'll leave it there. Amanda, thanks so much for joining us.
All right. Thank you, Dan.
Appreciate it.